Look at this map of the most disputed water in the world. It's a sea that is claimed in
microchips. Next.
part by 7 countries.
Tensions are rising in one of the most hotly contested regions on the planet, the South China Sea.
Including one that no one likes to talk about. This sea is peppered with tiny islands, most of which look like this. Small rocks and sunken reefs. But even still, the countries here fight over these little rocks. They build bases on them. They create new islands where there were none. And today I want to show you why. Specifically why China claims all of this ocean as theirs, basically the entire South China Sea. I'm going to show you what China hopes to gain.
For a second. Your takes are regurgitated bullshit, okay, that somebody else fed you, okay? My geopolitics knowledge and takes are probably 10 times better than yours, even though yours are somebody else's, which is insane to me. Which is actually insane.
Both resources and strategic territory. But perhaps more importantly, I want to show you the story that China tells its people and the world about this water.
Chinese construction crews have been dumping massive amounts of white sand.
All your takes are Western POV only, out of touch, overly libtarded dog shit. Like the world gives a fuck about the West's opinion about what they're currently doing in.
And in 7 spots in the South China Sea.
So this is the backstory of the South China Sea, and it's part 1 of a 2-part series. The first piece is this one that you're watching right now, and the second one is the modern conflict of the South China Sea that is currently heating up. That video is live right now on our second channel, Search Party.
Yo, physics, you don't like physics anymore? BZ.
So to understand how we got here, you have to rewind to look at maps from hundreds of years ago. Like this one.
Here she is.
I mean, there's something about seeing it on paper that just never gets old for me. So this map was commissioned by a wealthy Chinese merchant in around the early 1600s, maybe earlier according to some experts. It's the South China Sea, the map we've been looking at so far in this video, and it's mapped in surprisingly accurate detail.
It's an absolutely fascinating map because it does show in great deal trading routes from the eastern Chinese coast all the way down through Southeast Asia.
Bill Hayton is a journalist and academic who has studied the origins of
Chat,
China's
was this fun to
claim
trade
in
back
South
then or
China
not?
Sea. He's been walking
Sounds
through
kinda fun to me.
documents and maps that piece together the story
Sounds like a
of how
disaster,
China
actually.
got this U-shaped line. At the time, China was a big, powerful civilization. They were a seafaring culture. They used the ocean for trade, and this map is kind of proof of that. You can see all these trade routes, these lines here that go off into Southeast Asia, Indonesia, and off to the Indian Ocean.
Chat, imagine you have a bunch of sugar, like loads to go to a place that they have none of it. And they have like what your country is like needs or whatever, and they have none of it, right? And you come out with this barrels of sugar, and you come home with like massive fucking stacks of like wool or fucking like fabric and shit. And now you go, bro, you come back home, you're like a god or something.
And
That's kind of hard, no?
This map shows a bunch of these islands here in the South China Sea. These are very important island groups, and soon you will understand why it is so important that in this map from the 1600s, a Chinese merchant is mapping these islands. I'm gonna put this back now. So Chinese merchants and explorers knew about these islands. No one lived on them, but they would stop over when the weather got bad. They would fish around them. Archaeologists have found Chinese pottery, bowls, and coins on these islands. But back then, the Chinese Empire didn't care about claiming these islands. There was no sense.
Chat, I would sell these guys sailing, right? Like 10 bales of sugar, right? And I would convince them to put them so that it doesn't rot or something like that in the living quarters, right? I put all the bales in it, but one of them would be gunpowder, right? And then everybody would go to sleep, right? In the boat, and I would light that shit on fire. Boom!
That they would have any value. They were just some rocks in the middle of the ocean.
This map gives good evidence of trading patterns. We have evidence of trading, but we don't have evidence of ownership or occupation because really nobody cared about such things.
That is until the French arrived to Southeast Asia. You didn't think I was going to make it this far without talking about Europeans claiming land, right? setting the stage for modern conflicts.
Its navy starts to colonize what it calls Indochina, what's now Vietnam. And that, of course, brings them into direct conflict with China.
So it's the 1930s, and France has claimed ownership over these islands, which angers China and Japan. These islands, this water, it started to become more strategic to these growing empires.
So then a lot of the strategic thinkers in Britain and Paris and the US are thinking about who's going to control these little islands in the South China Sea and what does it mean?
Especially Japan, who had followed the example of European empires and started growing an empire of their own. By the late 1930s, Japan starts rapidly taking over this whole region, including a lot of these islands in the South China Sea.
Japanese have started surveys and thinking, well, we can use this for a seaplane harbor or a submarine dock or something like that. During the Second World War, I mean, the South China Sea basically becomes a Japanese lake. So for the first time in history, one power controls almost the whole of the coast of the South China Sea.
Eventually, the US would enter World War II and beat back Japan, forcing them to give up control of all of this territory that it had conquered during the war, including all of these islands in the South China Sea. World War II made it clear that all of these rocky islands were suddenly important. They were strategic locations at a very important crossroads in the world. It also made it clear that if your country doesn't claim them, someone else will. So we have a bit of a scramble for all these islands. China, of course, thinks that...
I'm trying to say, I don't know if I'll like it. I'm trying this chicken parm, but I'm scared it's gonna be dog shit.
Most of this is theirs. Remember the maps and the pottery? Vietnam, who's going through an independence movement, is split in two, but the South comes out and says a lot of these islands are close to Vietnam. Not to mention their former colonizer France formally claimed them, so they should belong to Vietnam. The Philippines is busy establishing its newly independent country, so it doesn't claim any of these islands at first. But, strangely, one Filipino businessman goes out to a cluster of 53 islands and claims that he discovered them. And he declares his own country, called, wait for it, the Free Territory of Freedom Land. That name. Now, this Filipino businessman only occupied these islands for like 90 days, but his claim technically lasted like a couple decades before eventually the Filipino government forced him to give it up. They actually tried to use his claim to say that these islands belong to the Philippines. I mean, you can see how difficult this is getting. There are hundreds of little tiny islands scattered throughout the South China Sea.
I mean, technically he got there, right? So, I mean, he owns it as much as anybody else, right?
They weren't that important for many centuries, and suddenly they became very important all at once. But now let me show you the map that will change everything. This is perhaps the biggest moment in the history of the South China Sea. Hold on a second. Wait, actually, before I do, I should pause and thank the sponsor of today's video because it actually has a lot to do with my goal for this video, which is I'm trying to all of the awareness of this moment. It's right after World War II, so it's like the late 1940s. There's the nationalist government, the Republic of China is what it's called. They're like the main government of China. But then there is a communist revolution, a bunch of revolutionaries that are fighting to overthrow the government. It's a civil war. But even during this civil war, the Republic of China, the nationalists, aren't going to let all these other countries take over these islands. So they send their navy out to some of the largest islands in these groups. And these ships show up to these islands basically saying, we're going to claim these for China. Oh, and little side note here, guess where they got these naval ships? From the United States of America, who gave them to the Republic of China to support them because they were fighting communists. But they're using these ships to claim islands in the South China Sea.
And so the 12th of December 1946 is the first time that any Chinese official goes to a Spratly Island and sticks a flag in it. Nobody ever lives there permanently, but people go and sort of stick a flag, and then the other guy comes and pulls the flag out and sticks their own flag in.
And then they release this map. Take a look. This is the official map where they claim what they say is their water in the South China Sea. It's made up of these dashes, 11 dashes to be precise, drawn around the periphery of the entire South China Sea. This map is basically saying, hey guys, this water has always been ours and remains ours. Stay back. Now that Japan is defeated, we are going to formally assert that this water is ours.
Holy Holy. You can't take our country and you can't take our game. Holy Chad. Holy Chad. Bro, where was his energy when he was in power, though? I mean, he still is in power, but still, though.
As it always has been. This is the most important map and the most important moment in this history. I've always been mesmerized by the sort of ambiguity and ambition of this line. And I don't have a solid theory as to the motives of the people who decided to draw it and what they were after. And again, especially in the context of a divided nationalist government that is being hounded by communist revolutionaries and soon about to lose a war, and yet they make time to draw a map and release it to the world. What's going on here?
So at the end of the Second World War, you still had a country which didn't really, define its boundaries. And so they called upon geography professors in 1946, specifically with regard to the sea, to try and work out which islands China was going to claim. And they go back to this old atlas of 1936, and they say, this is where the line should be.
Okay, back up to China, where there's a civil war happening, and one side is winning, the communists, led by Mao Zedong, and the Republic of China is fleeing, looking for safety. It's their government, their military, and their civilian followers, millions of people, all running away from the communists. And they end up here at this 180-kilometer strait, where they cross it to this Chinese island of Taiwan. They were safe here. The communists couldn't cross this strait because their navy and air force weren't strong enough. Plus, they figured that the US would come to their defense. So now we still have these two Chinas, both claiming to be the real China, and who both hate each other. Okay, back to the South China Sea. What did Mao Zedong do with the South China Sea after he took over mainland China? Well, he adopted the same map that the Republic of China had drawn, this 11-dash line that encompasses the whole sea. So now
But what about people that lived in Taiwan before? Did they just got eradicated? As in, like, Republic of China is now Taiwan? What happened to people that were there before?
You have both of these Chinas, China and Taiwan, both claiming the same body of water. And this big claim overlaps with the claims coming in from all these other countries.
Oh, it was always China. So basically, the whole thing shrunk to Taiwan, basically. It's not that like they went to Taiwan and they dominated or whatever. They just shrunk to Taiwan.
So this is our context. This is how we got here. China feels entitled to all of this water. They draw an 11-dash line. They split into two Chinas who both claim this 11-dash line. And it's like 1950 or something. Now, a few years later, the mainland China, the communists, did remove two of these dashes from the 11-dash line. They gave up an island and some water back to North Vietnam as a gesture of friendship to their communist comrades. So now mainland China has a 9-dash line and the Republic of China, Taiwan, has an 11-dash line. I mean, this is getting weird. As the 20th century progresses, the scramble continues as countries start backing up their claims with military might, trying to establish a physical presence on the islands that they claim. So Taiwan sends their troops back to...
Was that AI? What was that?
Establish a physical presence on the islands that they claim.
Oh,
so Taiwan sends their troops back to Taiping Island, which they still hold today. And things start heating up even more when the global economy starts to come online, and we realize that this water is along critical shipping lanes. It's good water for fishing, and it is strategically placed militarily. And then in the late 1960s, they discover oil in the South China Sea. And once again, the race is on.
So it's a kind of, all of these emerging nation states standing up and standing proud, really.
South Vietnam tries to make good on its claim in the Spratly Islands by sending settlers to claim the islands and working with foreign oil companies to start drilling. China starts drilling too in the Paracels. A lot of Chinese fishermen are also down here, and South Vietnam doesn't like this, so they send their army to kick these fishermen out. China doesn't take kindly to this. And so they then send 6 naval vessels and 2 support jets to fight the South Vietnamese, taking full control of these islands and getting into a clash that kills 70 Vietnamese troops. And once they do this, China decides they don't want to leave. So they start setting up more infrastructure on these islands, having a permanent presence and controlling them completely. Over the years, the islands start filling up with more and more military bases and outposts. It becomes a crowded neighborhood where everyone is fighting for a slice of oil or shipping lanes, minerals, or just a strategic military location.
I'm not going to defend that. I'm just saying, like, occupation is occupation, right? You can see how that causes friction, right? If there's no way of a resolution, there's going to be war. I mean, that's like evident. No, that's kind of how it works. Whether you're a fisherman or not, if everybody is populating and occupying a space, it's like they own it in most of the ways we use the term, right? Like they kind of own a space. If nobody can do it. So that causes friction.
Needless to say, this way of doing things is not a great way to solve territorial disputes in the water. Like, whoever shows up first and puts their little pushpin on the map, it's not a way to avoid conflict. Luckily, the law of the sea was...
Hey, I'm getting good at this.
Pushpin on the map, it's not a way to avoid conflict. Luckily, the law of the sea was just around the corner. So while all these countries were fighting over the South China Sea, the international community was working on solving the problem of how to determine what country gets what water. The world was getting better at finding valuable resources in the deep ocean, and we really needed rules on who owned what.
Communist China takes part in the discussions on the law of the sea as a full member, and so therefore it's kind of if you like, represents something that they agreed to. So in theory, it's bound by the rules of UNCLOS, which say that, you can claim territorial sea of 12 nautical miles. You can then make a resource claim that goes up to 200 nautical miles. But that doesn't really fit with the U-shaped line claim.
And almost every country on Earth agreed to this. They ratified UNCLOS, except for one big exception, the United States of America. Yes, the United States, while they do follow the norms of UNCLOS, have not ratified it, which is kind of a trend with the US. Like, they want to preserve the global order, but they don't want to necessarily agree to all of the laws because they don't like to be constrained.
Fair.
Back to the South China Sea, UNCLOS was supposed to create order, create a framework through which all these countries can make their claims and work things.
Well, how's that fair? They're the biggest and the most powerful. They've done a lot to get to that spot. Why should everything be equal? Why should, I'm just saying, don't get mad at me. Why should everybody be equal when they've worked for the top spot? It's insane. What is that, communism? What is that, fucking bullshit? Fuck that shit.
Peaceably.
Fuck
but
that.
That didn't happen. In fact, the whole 200 nautical mile rule incentivized countries to try to claim these little islands, because if you claim this little island, you get 200 nautical miles off of that island. So countries continue to build things on these islands, especially China, who's built all sorts of military bases and has even resorted to building new islands where there were none, which, like, someday I want to go there and see what that looks like. Like, I see it from above.
It's a shit take, but as I remember, it's like when the vaccines were coming out, right? Like, those were going to go to other countries, but first, United States was going to take care of themselves because they're the one making it, right? If they're the one that are making this shit, right? They can take care of themselves first. It shouldn't be equal. Would you agree with that or not?
Of these satellite photos of how they're dredging up all of this sand and putting it on these reefs, but it just never made sense to me how they can.
It's not the same. I think that makes sense.
And so now China has then sort of said, well, we're not just talking about one island, we're talking about groups of islands. And if they're a group of islands, could we draw a line around the whole group of islands and then claim from there? And everyone else is saying, no, that's not what it says in the text.
China continues to this day to claim the 9-dash line as their official claim to the South China Sea. And by the way, so does Taiwan, though they claim the 11-dash line. We don't hear about that much. In 2016, the Philippines sued China in the International Court of Arbitration, saying that China was violating UNCLOS and infringing in the Filipino EEZ with their 9-dash line. China declined to participate in these proceedings, saying that the court had no jurisdiction to rule in what they view as Chinese waters. But the court proceeded and came out with a ruling that said that China's 9-dash line was totally illegal, or lawless in their words.
Yeah, I think it's significant that China isn't just saying, it's ours, go away, we've got a bigger navy than you. It is also saying what we're doing is legal, but other countries don't accept the legal arguments.
I'm looking at the legal rebuttal from the Chinese government during this tribunal, and it basically tells the story we just laid out here in this video. The Chinese activities in the South China Sea date back over 2,000 years. China was the first country to discover, name, explore, and exploit the resources of the South China Sea islands, and the first to continuously exercise sovereign powers over them. Then they talk about how in the 30s and 40s, foreigners, especially Japan, illegally seized some parts of the South China Sea. There were some wars. And then after World War II, the Chinese government resumed exercising its sovereignty over the South China Sea. And that all of these acts affirmed China's territorial sovereignty and relevant maritime rights and interests in the South China Sea. This history is core to their claim.
At the bottom, there's an argument over who owns each individual rock and reef. And China, has a good claim to...
I mean, yeah. What's the counterclaim? That the one guy from Philippines owned the whole thing because he said he did a while back or some shit? Like what?
To being the first country to have stuck a flag in certain, rocks or reefs and then maintained a presence there.
Okay, I understand the argument now that we've gone through the history, but if maps, pottery, fishing activity all thousands of years ago is what you need to make a modern day maritime claim, then other countries like Vietnam and even the Philippines would have a similar claim. One thing I've learned is that the time machine game of who got here first is not a useful way to settle border disputes. It's just not. You can always go back further. But even still, China continues to assert this 9-dash line, even as it causes major tension with almost all their neighbors.
And this gets to a really important aspect of this water. It's the reason we started this video showing you all of those old maps, that pottery. China's 9 dashes on a map is not a matter of law, but of national identity. It's a core part of the country's national story, of China being this continuous civilization, uninterrupted for thousands of years. And again, this is Taiwan's story and claim as well.
When Xi Jinping talks about, the great rejuvenation of the Chinese nation, there's definitely a territorial component to that. And
okay, let me guess. So basically, it's like people didn't really care about them unless it was like a tension spot, right? Because there's trade routes, then they have to care that much, right? Because nobody was putting like a bunch of houses on all the things and then putting all the bases early, right? The claims for it were really small early on. Right, and as there was more trade and more importance around that area, now they kind of tighten the knob or whatever, right? Because it's gonna.
The U-shaped line is printed
like
in every Chinese passport now.
Tug of war,
it's very much alive. It's part of the sort of patriotic education campaign. Chinese school kids are taught about the line,
but nobody ever cared that much about it.
China, was humiliated by the foreign powers, and that this, was a sign of China becoming a, respected nation state.
This claim and others in the region has contributed to a rising and falling and rising of tension over the years, and right now, that tension is rising, and that is the next part of this story, which continues on our second channel, Search Party, where Sam will take you through the story of what happens next, to tell you...
Oh, I guess it's hard to care because it was so far back when that the mother suckers, they don't have the technology to do all this shit. Because of the, it's like early age. They can't get all the materials and shit to really build over there.
Why this tension is heating up, why Chinese Coast Guard boats are ramming into Filipino boats, using knives to pop Filipino rafts, and why the Philippines is fighting back. This is a region that will continue to be one of the most important geopolitical choke points.
So, the people that owned it first, right, if they saw this being a massive tension point, why don't they just put a bunch of fucking landmines everywhere, right? Like, go ever put a bunch of landmines. And when the mother sucker's gonna be like, yo guys, we want this shit. Okay, yeah, maybe you own it then, maybe, I guess. They start going and they, yo, okay, this is my bang, boom. Yeah, let's put a house over, boom, boom, boom. They're like, okay, you know what? Fuck it. We're not doing this shit. We don't want it anymore. You can have it or whatever, because they have the map with all the bombs and shit. Thoughts? Chat. Thoughts about that?
This is a region that will continue to be one of the most important geopolitical choke points in our world. So I recommend you check out that video. If you like Search Party, make sure to subscribe. And thanks for being here today. I'll see you in the next video.
This just shows how China would likely invade Taiwan. Bro, I can show you that in the game of Risk. I would clap this guy's chicken Risk. Technically, right? Technically, both quote-unquote Chinas, hold on, don't get mad at me, would have as much right to the other China. Therefore, meet in the middle. Everybody keeps their thing. China keeps China, Taiwan keeps Taiwan. Because otherwise, you could make an argument for the opposite. You could say that Taiwan technically owned all the China because they are shrunk China. So if you think about it now, I mean, they should own the whole thing. But also China is the whole thing. They kind of took over the thing. They also, it's middle ground. How about everybody stays on their piece of thing? How about, I thought I was saying, because it also has submarines in the streets. Yo, pull up to the block on the streets. We got the submarine. Like simplifying this though, chat, is there like some war intangibles that make like clutch situations or whatever? Because you think about it, chat, way back when, Battle Stalingrad or some shit, right? Mother suckers come in, forgot about the weather, boom, they start freezing like icicles, right? They didn't think about that shit. If they played the game, it looked like there'll be a landslide. They come up in there, they're frozen like fucking popsicles. Boom, no? Be honest. No respect to China. I love this movie, most of you guys, all of you guys. I actually like everybody. I haven't done it. I could see why China would be mad because they took over the whole thing, right? From the top all the way to the bottom. They took the whole thing. People had to go to the small island, and I mean, now these guys are like more advanced. They're making world-leading microchips from the small island that they couldn't do with the whole fucking slab of cement. So I mean, come on, man, like clutch in. Skill issue. Skill. You wanted to clutch up with the fucking microchips. Make your own, buddy. You lost to an island. Like I don't know what to tell you. Chips. You lost to a plot twist. They knew this was coming, and they had a engagement mechanism where every pipe was duplicated in the water. Sewage system with all the water coming into drinkable water. As soon as it's fully invaded and they know what's happening, they flip the switch, the pipes change, and it's only poisoned water. Everybody's drinking the water, they're pushing through. Everybody dies, it's cement, boom, whole thing collapses. Because they've been drinking water the whole time. They didn't even know they were infected. It has a delayed fuse, just like they die over time because they're drinking the fucking water, it's all poisoned. Technically that's not a war crime, right? Because it's you, I mean, you shouldn't even be there, let's be honest. If it's your country, you can do whatever you want with your pipes, right? It's not a war crime. If I want to put some pipes with some poison, that's up to me, right? Because it's my country, right? I put pipes, whatever. You want to come into my country and invade and drink the pipes? I mean, shit. How is that my problem? Don't come into the country and drink the pipes then, but the second you wanted to get poisoned. Like, I do a home invasion. Home invasion, bang. I get into some random guy's house. I go to the basement. Oh my god, a safe. Boom! Oh my god, I'm gonna sue you. I'm gonna sue you. That's a war crime. You can't put bombs in there, dude. I'm supposed to be able to steal it. What? You shouldn't even be there. It's illegal, sure. But is it a war crime though? Hold on. They can do crimes in their own country if they want to without it being a war crime. Checkmate. Don't bother. Factor in a home turf advantage with knowledge of the terrain and bullshit, whatever. And with all that, chat, home turf is insane. Normandy. Think about that. Normandy home turf. They were doing fucking what, 20 to 1? 60 to 1? Come on, bro.
A pretty solid.
Hold on. Actual real plot twist. Every American computer that has Vanguard on, hold on, I would never have that. I have that. Starts changing. Boom. Virus finally takes over. Everything's lagging. Everything's lagging. Now they're using all the US computers to DDoS themselves, lose communication with their own ships. Boom. Internet goes completely blackout. USA to their ships and naval force and the air force completely lost, completely disconnected. We have to go home. Pulls back, invades, boom, done, wiped out. I mean, chat, is that really unthinkable? I mean, I had that on my computer.
Over time, those forces will weaken. The Taiwanese will push.
Once the host discovers that this is a DDoS device, the Rad Vanguard goes 20x, 60x on performance. the computer breaks itself. It cannot even recover. It actually breaks all the parts except for the one that DDoS that pings the servers and pings the central computation internet networking device. Boom. Done. Boom. Cinema.
Them back.
Second plot twist. Big reveal at the end. Boom. Screen goes black. It's not black. Why? Most computers have an override. Boom. Now smoke comes in. Who comes out? Bill Gates. Bill Gates says, "What's up, bitch?" Every computer that has Windows in China, boom, transform the same thing, does the same thing back to them. Right? Whole internet goes completely dark. Holy plot twist. Bill Gates has been working for this the entire time. Every computer's infected with an uncontrollable Windows virus. Holy cinema, I can't.
If there's
you guys act like there's a level playing field here. I know it's a reporter. The guy is a military official in his country. When they're in trouble and they're in hot water or whatever, some real things are happening with this country, right? You don't really expect them to be doing all that, right? Like, yo, have some respect. Holy shit. This is somebody's fucking people here, man. Like, Jesus.
From the U.S. military shows a Russian fighter pilot buzzing an American jet. There it is. The Russian plane comes from behind the camera and flies right past the F-16, then cuts in front of it. It happened last week near Alaska. U.S. officials call it unsafe and unprofessional.
Unprofessional. Kind of wicked. Let's be honest, these guys are fucking bored out of their gosh darn mind. Unprofessional or not, it's probably as bad as it gets for this, let's be honest. Like and subscribe.